Hey everyone! Today we're unpacking a really truly fascinating historical text. We're looking at an incredible story of ancient geopolitical deception, a literally brilliant disguise, and a pretty massive mistake made by seasoned leaders. It's an amazing chapter, so let's get right into it.
Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today we explain Prophets Joshua chapter 9 in a clear and simple way, step by step.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, introduction and brief context. Second, the Gibeonite deception unfolds. Third, a hasty peace treaty. Fourth, discovery and confrontation. Fifth, key ideas and clarifications. And finally, number 6, practical lessons and recap. We're going to cover everything chronologically and, by the end, pull out some really practical lessons for us today.
Section 1, Introduction and Brief Context. Before the main events of this chapter can actually unfold, we really need to understand the political climate west of the Jordan.
Let's read directly from the first 2 verses of the text. And it came to pass, when all the kings that were beyond the Jordan heard thereof, that they gathered themselves together to fight with Joshua and with Israel with one accord. So, the word is out, right? The Israelites have just achieved massive victories at Jericho and Ai. Israel is now seen as a massive threat, and the local kings are absolutely terrified. But instead of running away, they're banding together.
So, who exactly are we talking about here? Well, this grand coalition included the kings of 6 distinct nations. We've got the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. They were all located west of the Jordan River, spread across the rugged hill country and along the Mediterranean coast. Their goal was pretty simple, forming a massive, unified military alliance. And the why is super clear. They wanted to wage total, uncompromising war against Joshua and the Israelites. But, and this is where it gets really interesting, while these 6 nations chose the path of war, there was one specific group of people who decided to try a completely different, remarkably clever tactic. Let's move to and see how this builds in Section 2, the Gibeonite deception unfolds.
So the Gibeonites also heard what Joshua had done to the mighty cities of Jericho and Ai. But instead of taking up swords, the Gibeonites, who, by the way, were actually part of the Hivite nation living nearby, one of those very groups we just mentioned in verse 1, well, they realized that fighting Israel directly was basically a death sentence. So the text tells us they decided to work willily. I love that phrase. It means they used supreme cunning, craftiness, and deceit to ensure their survival.
I want you to picture this elaborate disguise coming together piece by piece. Verses 4 and 5 describe it perfectly. They also did work wily, and went and made as if they had been ambassadors, and took old sacks upon their asses, and wineskins worn and rent and patched up, and worn shoes, and all the bread of their provision was dry and was become crumbs. Look, this wasn't just a simple lie. This was a fully produced theatrical performance. They dressed in worn, patched-up garments, put on these exhausted, clouded sandals, and packed dry, crumbly bread. They wanted to look exactly like weary, desperate travelers who had been walking through the brutal desert for months. With their costumes absolutely perfected, they boldly approached Joshua at the Israelite camp in Gilgal. Their opening line? Well, they claimed to be from a far country and requested an official peace covenant, a treaty, with Israel. Now, initially, the men of Israel were actually highly suspicious. In verse 7, they explicitly ask, "Perhaps you dwell among us, and how shall we make a covenant with you?" But the Gibeonites totally doubled down. They told Joshua, "We are thy servants." And when Joshua pressed them on where they came from and who they were, they executed their script flawlessly. They flattered Joshua, talking all about the great fame of the Lord in Egypt and those big victories over the kings Sihon and Og east of the Jordan. But notice what they brilliantly omitted here. They didn't mention the recent destructions of Jericho or Ai at all. Why? Because if they had truly been traveling for months from a distant land, there's no way they would have heard the latest breaking news. It was literally a masterpiece of manipulation.
Before we go any further, we really need to understand exactly what they were asking for: a covenant. You see, in the ancient Near Eastern world, a covenant wasn't just a piece of paper. It wasn't a casual handshake. It was a binding, unbreakable agreement between 2 parties, and it was almost always sealed with a solemn oath taken before God. To break a covenant was to invite divine wrath. It was totally permanent. And this absolute, unbreakable protection is exactly what the Gibeonites were after.
And that brings us to Section 3, a hasty peace treaty. This right here is the critical turning point of the chapter.
Verse 14 is perhaps the most tragic and telling verse in the entire chapter. It says, "And the men took of their provision and asked not counsel at the mouth of the Lord." So the crucial point is right here.
The Israelites looked at the moldy bread, they looked at the cracked wineskins, and they made their final decision based entirely on what they could see and touch, completely bypassing their greatest resource.
And this brilliantly illustrates the trap of human arrogance. Think about it. On one hand, the Israelites did what they thought was logical due diligence. They examined the physical evidence, tasting the dry, moldy provisions, inspecting the torn sacks. But on the other hand, they failed entirely to seek spiritual guidance. Joshua and the leaders had the ability to literally seek counsel from God, but they felt so confident in their own physical senses and logical deductions that they just didn't bother to ask the Lord for the truth.
Because they trusted their eyes over divine inquiry, the trap snapped shut. Verse 15 tells us, "And Joshua made peace with them, and made a covenant with them to let them live, and the princes of the congregation swore unto them." It is done. The binding, unbreakable oath has been sworn. Based purely on that physical disguise, the Israelites have officially allied themselves with the very people they were commanded to drive out of the land. Now we move into Section 4, Discovery and Confrontation, because as you might guess, the truth inevitably comes to light.
A lie this massive simply cannot stay hidden for long. It took exactly 3 days. Just 3 days. Verse 16 says, "And it came to pass at the end of 3 days after they had made a covenant with them, that they heard that they were their neighbors and that they dwelt among them." Imagine the shock. As the Israelites packed up camp and journeyed forward, they arrived right at the doorstep of the Gibeonite cities, Gibeon, Kephirah, Baroth, and Kiriath Jearim. Those distant travelers from a far-off land? Yeah, they were actually living right down the road.
As you can imagine, the fallout was intense and immediate. The entire congregation of Israel was absolutely furious. They murmured and complained bitterly against their leaders for being so easily duped. But the princes, the leaders of Israel, they held their ground. Why? Well, because they had sworn an oath by the Lord, the God of Israel. They understood that despite being tricked, breaking an oath made in God's name would bring immense divine wrath or punishment upon the whole nation. The sanctity of God's name was just far more important than their wounded pride. So they reached a pretty tense compromise. The Gibeonites would be allowed to live, honoring the treaty, but they would be assigned a very specific, permanent role within Israel.
That role was to become hewers of wood and drawers of water. Let me clarify what this somewhat difficult phrase means. In ancient times, this was the lowest, most physically demanding form of menial labor. They became a permanent servant class. They were tasked with constantly chopping heavy firewood and hauling massive water supplies. And this wasn't just for the general community, but specifically to serve the house of God and the altar of the Lord. So they traded their sovereignty and their freedom for their very survival.
Then, Joshua calls the Gibeonite leaders in for a direct, face-to-face interrogation. He demands, "Wherefore have ye beguiled us? Why did you deceive us?" And their answer is incredibly revealing. They confess immediately, saying, "Because it was certainly told thy servants, how that the Lord thy God commanded his servant Moses to give you all the land." You see, the Gibeonites didn't lie out of malice. They lied out of absolute terror. They knew the prophecies. They actually believed in the power of Israel's God way more than Israel's own neighbors did. They knew God's word to Moses was true, and they did the only thing they could possibly think of to save their own lives.
Let's move to Section 5, Key Ideas and Clarifications. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is we get to step back and look at the overarching themes of this explainer based strictly on the text.
Looking at the plain meaning, or Peshat, of the text, we clearly see some big ideas. First, human senses are easily fooled. That moldy bread, the cracked wineskins, they were incredibly convincing, but they were still a lie. We simply cannot always trust what our eyes see. Second, this chapter highlights the absolute sanctity of an oath. Even though the Israelites were totally scammed, an oath made in God's name is unbreakable. Third, it's fascinating to see the Gibeonites' deep, unshakable belief in the God of Israel's inevitable victory. They surrendered their dignity because they knew God would win. And finally, we see Joshua's immense character. I mean, despite public outrage and massive humiliation, he chose strict adherence to the sworn covenant. He chose honor and reverence for God's name over taking an easy vengeance.
And that brings us to Section 6, Practical Lessons and Recap. This is where we apply these ancient textual truths directly to our own lives today.
Let's walk through 3 actionable steps you can apply directly to your daily decision-making process based on what happened in Joshua chapter 9. Step 1. Pause before acting. The Gibeonites created a totally false sense of urgency and relied on outward appearances. In your life, whether it's a big business deal or a major life choice, never let urgency force you into a hasty agreement. Step 2.
Seek higher counsel. The Israelites failed because they asked not counsel at the mouth of the Lord. Do not rely solely on your own logic or understanding. Take a step back, pray, or seek out wise, trusted mentors before you sign on the dotted line. And step 3, keep your word. Joshua and the princes honored their oath, even when the public was furious and the truth was super embarrassing. When you make a commitment, stand by it. Honor your word, even when it becomes deeply inconvenient. True character is built when we uphold our promises in the toughest times.
As we wrap up this explainer on Chapter 9, ask yourself, in your own life, are you relying solely on the moldy bread of physical evidence, or are you remembering to seek higher counsel before making your most critical commitments? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.